Hello, friends. Welcome to the Monday Night Book Club. We're doing Civics 101, U.S. Government 101, whatever. We're using the high school textbook, American Government. So we're basically going through an entire year's or semester's worth of U.S. government. And tonight's the last chapter. So I don't know if we'll be able to get through the entire chapter tonight. It may be one more week. A lot of good stuff in here, and so it really is appropriate to what's going on in the world. So we can take a look at a lot of the stuff that's here, and kind of get an understanding of why some of the things are the way they are around the world. So let me see. We've got Gil Gray Man Prepping was on here while he was still on his other live, because he beat me over here. I left his live and came over here, but he was already here. Shenanigans, welcome. Little Lone Prepper, wow, fantastic. Great to see you. I got to write down Shenanigans. I want to make Shenanigans a moderator as well, and make sure that happens. What happened to my pencil? Oh, well. I'll get it. I will remember. I'll go back through this, and then there's a way I can do it easier when I get to go through this. Hey, Mr. Peter, welcome. Triple G Farms. Good to see you, my friend. I was at the gun store today, and I thought about you, and but I was they had this beautiful M1 up on the what do you call it? It's M1A. There we go. Up on the wall. I was trying to look for an EZ for Helen's because of her broken arm, to see if she could handle that a little bit better. And so I don't know why. I just thought of you while I was in there. Diana too, welcome. Good to see you. Prepper for the Ages. Hello. Welcome. Sue Me, one of our favorite Canadians. Welcome. And who else? North Carolina Farmer, Holly Ivans. Gosh, Kaylin Strain. Fantastic. What a great group this evening. Well, this is really kind of an exciting topic. It's really phenomenal. And I lived through a lot of it. Oh my gosh. I hate to admit that, but yeah. And I was watching a religious program earlier today, and they said, that there's only 6,000 years of recorded history. So if you imagine a lifespan of 100 years, that's only 60 grandparents ago. 60, what do you call it? Generations. And I think it's a little bit more than that, but they said if you just think of it 100 years to a generation, that's only 60 generations we've had written history. Wow, what a thought. That's unbelievable. So anyhow, foreign and defense policy. It starts off basically touting President Obama and some of the things that he wanted. He wanted nuclear non-proliferation. He downsized the military, of course. We had a big deal. BRACS was really big under President Obama, and that's the base realignment and closure. So the intention there was to save cost of operating multiple independent bases. And so different areas where there was commonality, they were joined. So for example, there used to be Randolph Brooks, Fort Sam Houston, Brooke Army Medical Center, all these different entities in San Antonio. And now it's just called Joint Base San Antonio. And so it has, I believe it has an Air Force is in charge of all that. And, so you have you have an Air Force command structure, even though you have Army units on the installations. And same thing. Well, when I was at Goodfellow Air Force Base, I was Army, and the host agency, of course, was the Air Force, and then the tenant agency was the Army, Navy, Marine Corps. That's all we had at that time. And but that was the our training school where we did advanced individual training, and I was an instructor for the 98 Gulf, which is the Russian Voice Intercept Operators course. Okay, so the roots of U.S. policy and foreign. I watched a fantastic uh, video today on Sacagawea. Wow, what a lady! Unbelievable, just unbelievable lady. Um, let me see. Yeah, thank you, Gil, for referring everybody over here. I do greatly appreciate that. Listen to Grandma, welcome. Good evening. Good to see you. Um, but so we take a look back, and we're going to go right to about 1805 is going to be our first major event. Let me go through this timeline first. So it says 1796, Washington's farewell address. Washington told us a couple things, and we see that bearing fruit today. We didn't heed his advice. Number one, don't have political parties. And we see that the consternation of our country right now are the two major political parties. He called on the United States to steer clear of permanent alliances. And here we are, this NATO versus Russia is getting us into a lot of issues. Our CETO, which is the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, of which Formosa is kind of an ex officio member, is getting us into a little bit of an obligation over there. And I mean, it's just our alliances are getting us into potential hazards worldwide. In 1823 was the Monroe Doctrine, where President Monroe told Europeans who were trying to come in and settle the United States, he said, nope, this continent belongs to us. We're doing our westward expansion. We started a whole bunch of purchases and annexations, and some through war. So we had the Louisiana purchase, we had the Alaska purchase, we had the annexation of California and Texas, and then the desert Southwest as a result of our wars with Mexico. And so then in 1904, we had the Roosevelt Corollary, and this corollary to the Monroe Doctrine asserted that the United States will police the Western Hemisphere in an attempt to maintain peace and security in the Western Hemisphere. So that's gotten us into a lot of trouble in Central and South America as well. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I. Up until then, we had been pretty much an isolationist country. We let them be, and their problems were their problems, our problems were our problems. And the only time we did anything international, we did two things internationally, I guess, really, and we'll kind of go back to those. One of them was the Barbary Coast. And this was this is about 1805, 1807. But the Barbary pirates on the north shores, basically what's Libya, Tripoli, those Tunisia, that area along the northern coast of Africa in the Mediterranean, were basically hijacking ships and kidnapping the people on board and holding them for ransom. And so that was one of the reasons why the USS Constitution was built, was because we were going to send it over to fight that war. And that's where the Marine Corps has part of its hymn from the Mexican-American Wars, from the Halls of Montezuma, and then the 1805 Barbary pirates thing to the shores of Tripoli. So that's part of the Marine Corps hymn is remembering that incursion that we had down there, fighting against them because they were taking our ships and holding our crews and personnel for hostage. And then, of course, just a very short time after that, in 1812, we had the same thing. We had the impressment of U.S. Merchant sailors into the British naval fleet, and that caused a consternation. Of course, it caused us our second war with Great Britain. Then, of course, the U.S. entered World War I. So with those exceptions, and of course, we also had the Spanish-American War, which was another kind of small incursion. And that caused some other major problems we'll talk about. In 1941, we entered World War II. Now, contrary to most popular belief, we never really declared war on Germany. Germany declared war on us. And we were going to let that go. We were going to forget all about it. We didn't really want to get involved in Europe. We didn't want to get involved in World War II, although we were kept arming up for it. And we weren't going to get into it until Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And then On the next day, when we declared war against Japan, Japan had a mutual defense agreement with Germany, and then Germany declared war against the United States. And so then, of course, we defeated Germany first, even though Japan was our major aggressor. And then it took us from May until August. So June, July, August, 3 more months to defeat Japan than it did for us to do Germany. And then in 1947 is when we say that the Cold War began. And 1970, under President Nixon, we had kind of a major breakthrough, and we had more of a detente. We did not have any trade at all with China until President Nixon. And then in 1970, that's when we began the trade with China. And gosh, I wish we hadn't done that now. But anyhow, so President Nixon opened up China, and then we also saw a softening of the Soviet Union, and that was kind of, where we had a little bit better relationships with the Soviet Union. Then, of course, everything changed on 9/11, 2001, and we began to forget about China and well, not forget, but maybe sweep them under the carpet, China and Russia, and we focused on international terrorism. So that's kind of a brief history. So let's go back and see where we are. So the early republic, we had the Embargo Act in 1807, and what that did was that was supposed to prevent U.S. ships from leaving. We could not depart the United States because of the Embargo Act unless we knew where they were going and what they were going to be doing. So this is basically the beginning of the curtailment of the slave industry in the United States as well. And so after about 1807, there weren't any new slaves really brought into the U.S. All the ones that were here were the ones who were kept, and that became a hereditary status basically in the United States. So we didn't really have any new slaves brought in after about 1807. Then in 1823, we had the Monroe Doctrine. We kind of touched that a little bit. Any attempt on the parts of Europe to extend their system or to any portion of this hemisphere was going to be dangerous to our peace and safety. It promised to continue the American policy of non-interference in the internal concerns of European nations. So we said, hey, you keep your hands off of North America, we'll keep our hands off of Europe. We aren't going to get involved there. So and then we got into expansionism and manifest destiny. So under manifest destiny, we decided that basically from the Atlantic to the Pacific belonged to the United States. And so we took land. That's what we talked about earlier. We took land from the American Indians. Primary battles were against the Creek, Seminole, Sioux, Comanche, Apache, and several other tribes. It bought area from the French, the Louisiana territory. Oh, I left out Spanish when I talked about that earlier. We bought Florida, and then we bought Alaska from the Russians. Russians want Alaska back now. They say they got screwed on the deal. Yes, they did, but it was a valid deal. We didn't pay what it was worth, that's for sure. They called it Seward's folly. Seward was the Secretary of State who made that purchase, John Seward. I believe it's John Seward. And then we had the 1846 Mexican War. So now the 1846 Mexican War was basically after the Texas War of Independence and then Texas admission into statehood. And then we had the Mexican territory actually came up into Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and of course, California. So that war, the Mexican-American War of 1846, gave us basically the Rio Grande as the southwestern border there, and then pretty much a straight line from El Paso across to San Diego, where we had kind of a demarcation line of the states of New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Okay, then we had Roosevelt, the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. President Theodore Roosevelt asserted in 1904 it was responsible for the United States to assure stability in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, right prior to that, in 1896, we had the other Spanish-American War, and this is the one where the USS Maine blew up in Havana Harbor. What we have recently found out, they sent divers down into Havana Harbor, and what we recently found out was we had thought that it was attacked by the Spanish and that it was sunk by the Spanish. What we now know is that it looked like it was an internal explosion inside the main, probably coal dust and coal fumes from their coal storage locker, because it was a coal-fueled steamer. And so it appears as if something happened in the coal storage area, blew it up and sank it. So that was a war that was based off of another one of those false things, but we did what we thought right at the time. So from that, we acquired 3 major possessions that will become important later. So the first of the 3 possessions we had that we gained from Spain as a result of the Spanish-American War: Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And so then we ceded independence to both Cuba and to the Philippines. We gave Philippines their independence right after World War II, and then Cuba shortly thereafter as well. And that brings on another issue with, the corrupt government there that we put in place, and then of course Fidel Castro and his revolution, and then something we'll have to talk about here a little bit further. I'm sorry, I've got to go back. I said that the Spanish-American War was 1896. It was 1898. I just found that page. So I apologize. That it was 1898, not 1896. So the interwar years, basically the same thing that we had happen right after the beginning of the War on Terror. We say, hey, Russia, the Soviet Union has collapsed. The Warsaw Pact has died. So we don't need as many military vehicles. We don't have to put as much money into military arms, keeping up. Basically, it was Star Wars from under President Reagan that caused the Soviet Union to go bankrupt. And so we said, hey, we're spending way too much money. Of all of the defense budgets worldwide, in 2008, just a minute, let me find this page, I think we were like 44.2% of the total expenditures for defense up until President Obama. And then it has greatly reduced from there. Let's go with that guess right now, at 44.2% until I find that page, and that'll be coming up here shortly. Yeah, not seeing it right now. So the interwar years, we had that coming down. Now, we started to decommission a lot of our ships and everything else right after World War II. And then, of course, we had the Korean War. We had to rearm, bring everything out of mothballs. If you want to see something interesting, there is a mothball fleet in basically San Francisco, Oakland Bay area. That's where our mothballed fleet is. There's also a mothballed Air Force that is basically at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. And then just outside of Fort Irwin, California, we have our mothballed U.S. Army and Marine Corps vehicles, which are basically helicopters and armored fighting vehicles and all those kinds of things. Keep those in a desert type of a condition so that they don't rust quite as bad. But, we'll probably be bringing a lot of that back. What we've seen happen in the stuff that's going on in Europe is that the Russians, all their tier 1 and tier 2 tanks basically have been destroyed. So they're going back and they're calling up from their boneyards T-64s, T-72s, T-80s, and so some of their older vehicles. The BTR-80s are, we're seeing more and more BTR-60s on the battlefield because the BTR-80s are being destroyed like you would not believe. Well, same thing with us. We're probably going to go through our inventory here pretty quick. We've had a major shift in how wars are fought. It seems as if every war there's a new catch that if you prepare for the last war, you're not going to win the next war. Then in World War II and afterwards, we became the world power, and so we had a couple meetings. We had the Bretton Woods meeting, and that's where we set up the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and we have been the global reserve currency ever since. So when President Nixon took us off the gold standard and said we can start just printing money willy-nilly, that the debt of the United States was all the backing that money needed, that's when inflation started. So you can blame the flooding of money and and inflation on President Nixon as well. So he got us with China, and they do all of our manufacturing, and then the Bretton Woods, and it's crazy. Then we had the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade at the same time under Nixon. And so economic development programs were designed to help facilitate international trade negotiations and promote free trade. So, and that was that was 1947. That was Truman, not Nixon. So the Truman Doctrine was basically, and this is basically what we later call the domino theory. The policy of the United States to provide economic assistance and military aid to countries fighting against communist revolutions or political pressure. So we were funding, for example, France was actually at that time being funded by, Vietnam was being funded by France. Then, of course, Indonesia by the Dutch. We had Korea, North South Korea. We were helping the South Koreans. There was all kinds of things that were going on. And so Truman said, well, we will try to fight the expansion of communism through the Truman Doctrine. And so then later the financial assistance towards the developing countries in Europe, because the British said they couldn't afford it. They were totally in debt. And the French were totally bankrupt. And so the only people who could rebuild Europe was the U.S. So we printed more money, and we went over and under the Marshall Plan and basically rebuilt Europe. Then in 1949, we decided that we needed a defense pact. And so that was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or better known as NATO. Now, there was one major change made to NATO in 1955 that was not when it was formed in 1949, and that was the admission of Germany, who had been just 10 years before our antagonist. We're now a member of NATO and helping us to defend against the communist onslaught from the East. Then, of course, what got me into prepping, October 22nd, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we found out a U-2 was flying over. We didn't have satellites back then. So we had U-2s and SR-71s. And a U-2 had flown over Cuba, found that they were bringing in intermediate range ballistic missiles. And so that was, we did a blockade of Cuba and told the Soviets to get those out of there or else. And so guess what happened today? Today, 5 Russian warships landed at Havana, to include a nuclear submarine and a cruiser with intermediate range ballistic missiles. And they have said that they're going to be doing constant monitoring of the Caribbean Sea. They have also, and then because we have provided weapons to Ukraine, President Putin, said that he is going to start providing weapons to include potential nuclear weapons to North Korea, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. So, so we are back at the Cuban Missile Crisis plus. So, now we're going to have nuclear subs in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Caribbean Sea. They're probably already off on the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. Estimates are flight time from the Gulf of Mexico to Kansas City about 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, so not very much warning at all. Let me see here. Of course, then we had the Vietnam War, and that was, we were helping the French because of NATO, and then the French lost, and we divided the country, and we took over helping the South try to defend itself. That was all because of an incursion at the Gulf of Tonkin. We later found out that that was a staged thing to get us in there. I believe, my personal belief, that was Johnson's war, because President Johnson owned 2 companies, and the more war we had, the more stuff they would sell to the military. And so anyhow, that was a big debacle. That was the beginning of my military career. So let's see here. The war on terrorism. So then September 11th, 2001, everything changed. And we began fighting the war on terror. And we no longer were committed to fighting all the things that we had in the past. Now, here's what's funny. In 1990, when the Berlin Wall fell, okay, so all of a sudden we had this de-escalation of military. So we went from like 19 active divisions down to 11. We mothballed all this equipment. We moved we had 4 divisions plus 2 armored cav regiments, 2 corps in Europe, plus 1/3 of the 1st Infantry Division was forward. That was deployed forward into Germany. So we had 4 1/3 divisions, several independent brigades. We had 2 independent cav regiments. We just had forces in West Germany like you would not believe. Well, when the wall came down, they were no longer needed there. So I think we're down to where we have less than 1 division now in Germany. We do have a Corps headquarters. I believe 7th Corps headquarters is still in Stuttgart. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe that's the case. And I know that we still have Landstuhl, which was one of our largest military hospital complexes. And that is still there. But pretty much that's when we really started declining our military. Fort Ord, one of the most beautiful posts that we had in Monterey, California. Actually, it was in Seaside. Monterey and Seaside kind of share a common city border. But anyhow, it was on the other side of Seaside, and a gorgeous post. And we closed that and sold it I think it was Golden Gate University bought the property for that and turned it into a college complex. But I mean, we just started selling willy-nilly all this land where we had military in the past, and then putting all that stuff in boneyards. Then the war on terrorism happened. We had to redesign our equipment. And of course, when we did, right before I retired, Desert Storm, which was January 16th, 1991, we took all of our stuff over to the Middle East, and just a fantastic war. And we were kind of cocky, because we won that war in 100 hours once we started it. And we thought, here was this fantastic army that had held off the Iranians during the Iran-Iraq war, and we were just decimating them. The shock and awe really worked. And so we were a little bit overly self-impressed, and when we came home, we started mothballing stuff. And then we have the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, the extensions of those. And that was a long time. And we started working more on counter mine measures, because the main threat, it had been that the main threat at the end of World War II was the tank and the aircraft carrier. And so that's what we focused on was armored vehicles and aircraft carriers and artillery and indirect fire weapons and long range missiles and things like that. So we started mothballing that and not putting much money into development as we had in the past. And what we were doing was we were looking at things like the MRAP, the mine resistant armored personnel carrier. So we were focused on how do we protect the occupants of a vehicle from IEDs, improvised explosive devices that were planted in the ground and blew upwards, instead of being an anti-tank shell coming towards you. So we changed our focus, and then now that we're back into a conventional war again, all that stuff that we built that's high off the ground becomes a big target for conventional weapons, which are the anti-tank weapons. But the new thing that's developing now on the battleground in Europe are the little things that fly. Oh gosh, when you get old, you start losing your vocabulary. Drone warfare. They just attach either a mortar shell or a hand grenade to a drone, and they fly the drone over. They see an open hatch on a tank or a APC or anything like that, and drop a hand grenade or a mortar shell inside an open hatch, and you've done far more damage at far less cost. and it's crazy. So we talk a little bit here about the changeover, the Departments of State, Defense, Homeland Security, how they interact and everything else, the intelligence community. I was very proud to be a member of the intelligence community, and especially NSA. I mean, my standard response to people was, NSA is listening. I said, no, they didn't send me to 2 years of Russian language school to listen to English. But I don't know. Under Obama, a lot of that changed, and it's crazy. We started using our own intelligence services against our own citizens, and that's crazy. Then we have the War Powers Act. We have a fantastic chart here that talks about defense spending over time, and it shows the ups and downs of defense spending. And so the peaks, some of the peaks where we've had peaks in defense spending, of course, the largest one was right after Pearl Harbor, then right after the invasion of South Korea. Then we had kind of up until 1972, the Cold War was about number 3. Then we had the Iraq War in 1990, 1991. But we were actually declining on our spending in 91 when we went over there, January 1991. Then 9/11, 2001, we kind of took that back up again, and that had a steady increase until 2010. We finally surpassed our expenses for North Korea and for Vietnam just about 2008. But we still are not at the amount that we spent for World War II. Then a couple of things that have been some special interest groups. Of course, you have the military-industrial complex, and that's the biggies that make money by selling military equipment. It's to their advantage to have a war where the equipment is destroyed, so that they have to replace it, and constantly making more and more money. So they have a very powerful lobby group in Europe. So then we take a look at our major trading partners. Our number one trading partner, believe it or not, is Canada. And then right behind Canada is China, and then Mexico, and then Japan, and then Germany. But China is probably 4 times the amount of Japan. About a 25% increase over, Canada is 25% increase over China, and China's about 25% over Mexico, but just crazy. So, then we have to take a look at terrorism and the open border and what all can be done there. So, we've pretty much had this constant quagmire of where do we spend our money? Do we spend it on foreign issues? Do we spend it domestically? And there's a fantastic little chart here, and I want to kind of point out some spikes here. So we've got a couple spikes, okay, where we have a lot more interest in foreign affairs and a decrease in domestic, but an increase in foreign. And those appear to be, let me see, this is the Iran takeover of our U.S. embassy. This one appears to be that immediate point there where we were fighting Gaddafi and the other terrorists like that. Then over here we have 9/11 Desert Storm, and then here's 9/11. So those are the 3 primary increases in spending, or at least in public support of spending of military, that have happened in the past 30, 40 years. So that's pretty much it. So as we take a look at history repeating itself, so we see, our intervention because of the Roosevelt corollary, our intervention in Central and South America. We don't have very good relations with Venezuela, with Nicaragua, a couple other countries. They see us as the heavy-booted thug instead of policeman of the Western Hemisphere. So they aren't that friendly to us. Of course, We had a pretty good relationship with Mexico under President Trump, and we lost that immediately thereafter. They had some elections. The cartels are running Mexico right now anyway, and the cartels have made it across the border. When is the last time you heard of the Crips or the Bloods? The cartels now own the Crips and the Bloods. They are nothing. The gangs that you see now are all either Mexican drug gangs or El Salvador, and so that's the MS-13, Mara Safety. But the drug gangs are the ones that have the predominance now. However, with the open borders over the course of the last 3 years, there have been at least 30,000 military age, unaccompanied, single, good shape, good physical conditioning, well-dressed men up from China come into our country. And so that's kind of, what's going on there. Take care, Pete. Sorry, I did it again. I touched my mouse and it took me out. So I'm back. But anyhow, so we got wide open borders. We don't know who's coming across. We know that there are potentially people on the terrorist watch list. We know that there are people from all over the world, and that don't like us, who are probably here in our country now. We see that the tensions between Formosa, also called Taiwan, and China, the mother China, have greatly increased. Now, remember that what happened there was Mao Zedong was the communist who was driving out the Japanese during World War II. And Chiang Kai-shek was basically the imperialist. So the two of them were driving the Japanese out of China in World War II. They were kind of allied, loosely allied, only in the sense of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so since both of them were fighting against Japan, they kind of mutually supported until the end of the war. And then China took over the mainland, and Chiang Kai-shek and his forces escaped to Formosa and renamed it Taiwan. And that's how that came about. So we've got North Korea doing all kinds of provocations against South Korea right now. We've got China looking at incurring into Taiwan. We've got President Putin saying he's going to put intermediate range ballistic missiles in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. He also said, Mexico is denying it, but he also said that he has been given permission to establish some military posts in Mexico. And so I think that's all provocation. And to be honest with you, he's probably got every right in the world. I mean, here we are with all these NATO countries butting up right against his border, and he's thinking, you can easily launch into my country or attack my country, no sweat. And what makes you think that you have proprietary right to not be threatened by me? And so he is going to make those attempts to threaten us, just as he feels threatened by us. So, and this is one of those escalatory things that it's not looking good. It's crazy. Those wind chimes tell me that probably it was an Amazon delivery. That was my Ring doorbell notification. Let me see here. Oh no, it's a bluebird flying in front of my alarm system. It's a bluebird. Yeah, he did say he wants to give missiles to Mexico as well. So, that's kind of where we are. Questions or comments? What do y'all think? We did get through it all. I can't believe it. Let me catch up here and see if there's anything up here in chat. I believe, and of course, I watch Gregory Mannarino, and he thinks that we're in for a recession, if not a depression, by the end of summer. A lot of the economists and money managers are saying that we're probably going to be um, in a major economic depression by the end of summer. Um, Absolutely correct. So what's going to be happening now is they're trying to come up with a new one. It's probably going to be the yuan, which is the Chinese dollar or Chinese currency, and that's the reason that China formed BRICS. So BRICS is a five-country alliance, and they've had several others join since originally forming that alliance. But it's an economic alliance where they're trying to promote the yuan as the world reserve currency, and that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So those are the five countries in BRICS. But yeah, the U.S. petrodollar officially ended yesterday, and so we are no longer the world's reserve currency as of yesterday. So our opportunity, if anybody cashes in on our debt, like China is doing, that can put us into national bankruptcy, and we can see the opportunity for a major economic disaster happening in the very, very near future. I would encourage you to prepare accordingly. Let's see, Triple G had to go to work. Yeah, it's going to take a miracle. It is, Ms. Kokoma. So thank you for pointing that out. It's way beyond our capabilities to do anything about it. Shenanigans says it has not recognized their state, totally unrecognizable and getting worse. And one of the things we've seen is we're monkeying with liberal policies around finance and economics. And as a result of this new $20 an hour minimum wage for fast food workers, there have been, I forget the number of fast food restaurants that have shut down. The latest one was a store that had something like 120 stores throughout California. But I've heard a conservative estimate is that at least 10,000 workers have lost their jobs because the company can't afford those and have closed. So when we monkey with the minimum wage, trying to give people a better lifestyle, that money's got to come from somewhere. And then where that comes from, and it's simple economic principles, okay? You have the supply-demand curve. So as supply becomes more abundant, price goes down. So low production, high price, high production, low price. And then you got demand. So that depending upon the price, you've got, if it costs a lot of money, I really don't want it. You aren't going to sell that many. If it costs cheaper, then more people are going to buy it. So you got to produce a whole bunch in order for more people to want it and buy it. Well, if you raise the price, then what happens? Less people can afford it, less people buy it, then your profit margin goes down. So how do you pay for the increased $20 an hour wages for employees on minimum wage in California? You raise the price of your Big Mac, okay? So now a Big Mac in California is like $14, right? And so nobody's going to buy that. So what happens is if you're not selling $14 Big Macs, then you go bankrupt, okay? So, and that's the problem that they have right now by monkeying with the minimum wage. We really need to let the market resolve itself. Fast food employment was never intended to be a profession. I worked in a fast food restaurant, a place called Taco Box in El Paso. It actually preceded Taco Bell in El Paso. It was a local one. Oh man, we had a fantastic caldillo burrito, and it was just something else with salsa verde. Oh my God, it was great. But anyhow, I worked at Taco Box all of my way through junior and senior years in high school, my freshman year in college. And then the next time I worked in fast food industry was I worked at Straw Hat Pizza in 1976, so I could pay my attorney for my divorce fees. But so I was working, normal 10-hour day in the Army and then another 4-hour shift at the pizza joint. And they had beer, so you'd go home smoking like pizza and beer, and that was not a pleasant thing. Yeah, I keep hearing that people are not at all happy with Trudeau. Southern California. I tell you what, I loved my 3 years in Monterey. That's just a great, beautiful state, but beautiful. And I really spent a lot of time in Yosemite. That's just gorgeous as well. The San Francisco Bay is just beautiful. The Russian River Valley up north, gosh, Big Sur. I mean, it's a gorgeous state. Don't like the politics, but a gorgeous state. Here's a funny thing. I saw a bluebird chasing a cat down the street. Bluebirds are extremely aggressive and very, 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 very defensive of their nests. As a matter of fact, my son-in-law sent us a video on his Ring doorbell. He went outside and a bluebird had put a nest up in their frame of their entryway to their house, and had some eggs in there. And so when he walked out of the house, the bluebird attacked him, and that was caught on their Ring camera. I'm looking outside of my state for a house. It's scary to move that far away from friends and family and totally alone. Your options are limited. You are absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. It's tough to pick up and move. I got accustomed to it in the Army. Making new friends. I was looking for a couple, Lyle and Jenny, and we went through intermediate Russian together. So that was 1 year. Then we went to Field Station Augsburg together for 3 years. And then all three of us went to Goodfellow Air Force Base for instructor duty for 3 years. So out of my 21 years in the Army, I had 7 years with Lyle and Jenny. That's the longest I had with anybody. Well, and then second longest was Charlie and his wife, Paula. And Charlie and Paula and I were together. He was in the Russian class ahead of me, basic Russian class ahead of me in Monterey. Then we all went to Fort Riley together. And then that's where I got divorced. And then they went to Japan. I went to Germany. Then all of us went to Goodfellow again as instructors. And so he was there with me as an instructor at Goodfellow, and Lyle and Jenny at the same time. And he and Paula got divorced, and Paula introduced me to Helen. So the best friend of my ex-wife introduced me to my current wife, and she knew exactly what I needed because we've been married now over 40 years. I would love to move to West Virginia as well. I'd also like the Ozarks, northern Ozarks, northern Arkansas, southern Missouri. That wouldn't be bad at all. Oh, I am quite sure. I'm quite sure of that. Yeah, and that CBDC is going to be based upon the international currency. You're absolutely right. Oh, well, we will keep you in our prayers there, Shenanigans. Red Lobster has a different excuse, though, Kaylin. What Red Lobster did was they did a marketing blunder. The same thing with Budweiser. When Budweiser did the, what was her name, Dylan Mulvaney or whatever commercial, they lost sales like you would not believe. And then Red Lobster did this all-you-can-eat shrimp. And so the revenue that they produced versus the cost of the shrimp has cost them to lose a whole bunch of restaurants. Of the 5 we have here in the greater Austin area, 3 of them are closing, and they're only going to keep 2. So yeah, Red Lobster had that. That's their own fault, though. That was a stupid promotion. All you can eat shrimp. They might have said one free refill or something like that and been able to survive, but the cost drove them out into bankruptcy. You're absolutely right. Mhm. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I agree. Uh, and I thought that I was the same way in the military, but you know, I was talking to the Little Lone Prepper over the weekend, and I think it was a Little Lone Prepper I was talking to, and I said, let me see, Fort Leonard Wood for basic training, DLI for basic Indonesian, Goodfellow, NSA, Fort Meade, Maryland, back to DLI for basic Russian, Goodfellow for Voice Intercept Operator School, Fort Riley, Kansas, back to Monterey for intermediate Russian, Field Station Augsburg, Germany, Goodfellow for instructor duty, Detachment Wilbeck, an intercept site on the east-west German border up by Checkpoint Alpha, then 511th MI Battalion in Stuttgart, in Augsburg, then 307th MI Battalion in Stuttgart, and then Fort Huachuca. So I had 14 different assignments or stations in 21 years. So that means that I moved on average every year and a half. So you kind of, although it's a very, very small community, chances are if you serve with somebody in this career field, because there are so few of us, you're going to have one or two assignments with that person. You're going to see them over and over again. And having the 7 years with Lyle and Jenny, 6 years with Charlie. So there's things like that. Some of the people I was with at Fort Huachuca, I had served with in 7th Corps. So, you constantly see people. When I went to Korea, 6 months TDY, the first sergeant in the 2nd MI Battalion, 102nd MI Battalion, 2nd Infantry Division, the first sergeant there for the SIGINT company, he and I had been instructors together at Goodfellow Air Force Base back in the 70s. So, you constantly see people that you know. So that's a little bit of a nice thing. But we also build that in. When we signed for quarters at Fort Huachuca, we signed for quarters, walked downstairs. People were bringing us, folding card tables and folding chairs and a black and white TV, all the stuff we needed to be comfortable until our furniture arrived, being shipped from Germany. So neighbors, you kind of build this cohesion in the military where neighbors take care of neighbors. And, which is quite different from the civilian world. When we bought our house in Round Rock, we were there 3 years before we found out that our next door neighbor was a third cousin of my wife's. So that you automatically build this closeness in the community in the military where you don't do that in the civilian life. Um, wow, that's great. And so Holly Ivins is supporting my story about how aggressive the bluebirds are. Blue jays, bluebirds, blue jays. I don't know. Um, a relative has land in central Arkansas near Lake Wachita. Oh wow, I'm jealous. If you ever go into Green Greg's or Swivelhead News live, Green Greg's is phenomenal. I really like him. You listen to him, you say this guy can't be, he's got that real deep Southern drawl. You think of him as being somebody from the swamp and everything else. The guy is a rocket physicist. This guy is smart. He doesn't sound like it when you're listening to him, but if you listen to what he's saying, he is super, super smart. I really enjoy him. He teaches me a lot. Just a Brilliant guy. And he had a worm farm. I believe he was in the South. I want to say in the South. I believe it was in Georgia, but it might have been somewhere else. And it got destroyed by a tornadic storm. And so he is in the process of moving. I think he's moving to Arizona. And right now he's living out of his van. He's transmitting nightly out of his van. Yeah, so the lady you knew in Army Logistics moved with some of the others in her unit in a few different places. So a couple of things the Army's done different since I retired. I retired in 1991, right after Desert Storm. And so some of the things they've done different is now, they used to do, and we think we learned a lesson. But in Vietnam, we sent guys over as individuals, and they became individual replacements in a unit. So it was all individual. So when you flew home on that Freedom Bird, there were 160 guys in that airplane. You didn't know any of them. There was no ability to decompress, to get rid of stuff. And then, of course, you were greeted, if you want to call it that, when you came home. And so the guys who came back from Vietnam had no way to decompress what they had experienced in Vietnam. And so we found out to be a major error. So now what we do again are the same thing we did in Korea, Vietnam, the very early portions of Vietnam. If you watch the movie We Were Soldiers, where they talk about he was Lieutenant Colonel at the time, but Lieutenant General Hal Moore and his battalion from the 1st Cavalry Division, it was sent as an entire battalion. But because of the losses in that battalion and the number of widows who were created in that one battalion, that's when they decided to do it with single replacements instead of entire units. But we're back to where we send entire units instead of individuals. And so now you have units move, and that forms a lot more cohesion, better friendships. But if you have enemies, you're going to be with your enemy for a long time too. So let me see. Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to try to get somebody on next week to interview. I do have a combat medic, Michelle Mitten Prepper, veteran prepper. Anyhow, Michelle is going to be with us the first Monday in July. I'm going to try to get a couple people with knowledge in certain areas that we might need. I would really, really like to get Roman Josefsky, who owns Mira Safety. I believe that he is probably one of the preeminent experts on CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protection right now in the commercial world. And I would really love to get him on and have him talk for a while. So I'm trying to get a couple good people on to talk, and I would also like to really invite Glenn Tate. We've done a lot of authors, and this series of books is phenomenal, people. I mean, if you're not reading that for our Thursday night fiction book club, it's a great book. I strongly recommend it. And so, that's where we are. Okay. Oh, I don't have my Bible. It's still in my bag from Bible study. I have my other Bible. This is King James. So let me see if I can find number 6. Wow. Talk about fortuitous. I opened up to Numbers 21. Number 6, 24. That's 7. Number 6, 24. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious to thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. So that's the King James version of that. So remember, we're all in this together, so we can come out the other side together. I'm having a rough time coming up with subjects to do for my 1-minute videos on prepper tips. So I would love your suggestions. So feel free to send me those suggestions. I would greatly appreciate those. But remember, we're all in this together, so we can come out the other side together. Continue to be nice, polite, and respectful to each other, because it is greatly appreciated. We need more of it in the world. We need people to be a lot more loving towards each other, understanding and forgiving. And with that, remember, we're going to make it through the other side, and we will be together. Take care, everybody. Thank you for being here. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.